Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
A master once said, "The poor have always been among us." Will that always be the case? Is universal abundance attainable? Mission Evolution Radio Show is coming to you around the world on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. Joining us now to explore moving from scarcity to abundance is Michael Wayne. Michael is the author of 5 books and a filmmaker. He's currently in post-production for a documentary film, How to Save Democracy. His most recent book, Towards a More Perfect Union, From Scarcity to Abundance for All, integrates politics, economics, psychology, and spirituality to show how to create a society that works for everyone. His website, drmichaelwayne.com. Michael, thanks so much for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Thank you, Gwilda. It's definitely an honor on my part to be a guest on your show.
So you have a Ph.D. What was your field of study?
My field of study was something called quantum integral medicine, and it was a field of study that I actually designed myself with the help of the faculty mentor I had, who was very, very with me on it. She ran a program called the School for Paradigm Studies. So that's why the book I wrote, Quantum Integral Medicine, with the subtitle was called Towards a New Field of Science and Human Potential, because we were basically trying to create a new paradigm.
Well, that's quite a challenge. I mean, do you feel like you were pretty successful there?
Well, we look at that was that was 25 years ago that I did that, and well, I guess I feel very successful in my studies, in the book I wrote, and how I put my ideas out there. Have I changed the field of medicine? No, but I think there's, I think what we do see, and perhaps I've played a small part in it, is we've seen a growing awareness of evolution, consciousness, like a show like yours. Really so many more people now putting the word about, creating a new paradigm of healing and human potential.
So you're also a practitioner of acupuncture, Chinese medicine, and integrative medicine. Where'd you study those forms?
I studied that in a school in San Diego, California, Pacific College of Oriental Medicine, which I think a few years ago they expanded their curriculum. Now they call themselves Pacific College of Health Sciences.
You speak about working with spirituality and economics and all sorts of different things. That's kind of integrative, just like medical integration is, isn't it? Like a integrative doctor.
Yeah. I think, we all have the capability, not just integrated medicine, but living an integrated life, to be, a holistic thinker, to really see the big picture, really see the interconnectedness of life. So whether you do from a spiritual standpoint, saying such as things like we're all one, or understanding that, politics, economics, spirituality, medicine, health, it's all interconnected. And I think, one big problem we face is just how much disunion we are. And when we start realizing we're all in this together, we could do better.
Yeah, and it shows itself up in medicine, where we've been complaining for a while about studying pieces and parts and having specialists in each piece and part, and somehow the humanness is lost in that. There's a way that things work together that's totally missed.
Yeah, it's really an unfortunate thing. I remember, going to a doctor as a kid, and it was her family doctor, and he knew the family, and I didn't have to go, maybe once a year for a school physical, and then if I got sick, but he knew you, and now it's, it's such a business, and carved into pieces. It's like, even in orthopedics, you have the specialists in different parts. You have a neck specialist, a leg specialist, and it's just, and there's no gatekeeper, and then people get lost in it.
It's the human body is, well, the human psyche and body and everything about the human is very, very, very complex. And I can certainly see why it's been broken down into various parts,
Uh,
with specialists. But within that, is there something that is totally, totally missed because it's not looked at as a whole? And does that apply to economics as well?
Yeah, there's a saying, Gwilda, and I agree with you that the body is complex, and it's good on the one hand that it's broken down and there's specialists who study different parts. But there's an old saying, it goes something like, the more and more we know about less and less, the less and less we know about more. And it's so, and it's the same thing in economics. There's macroeconomics, microeconomics, and from what I understand, a lot of students who study economics are studying more microeconomics and studying different aspects of it, but losing again that big picture, that ability to see holistically or integrative way of seeing how everything is so connected. Um, and it's really detrimental to the human experience.
It seems like our horizons would broaden greatly if we were able to do both.
Yeah, exactly. It's so that was, going back to my PhD and the book I wrote toward a more, my first book, Quantum Integral Medicine Towards a New Science of Healing and Human Potential. Really, what I was getting at was that ability to see holistically. Um, I was writing based on the science, based on ideas in quantum mechanics, based on complexity theory, and showing that humans have this capability to evolve to greater potential, to greater cognitive function, and that we are achieving that. But it seems like, on the one hand, a certain percentage are achieving that, and then others are just getting stuck in that reductionist mindset of breaking things down to smaller and smaller units and missing the big picture.
But wasn't that part of the stepping stones to get us to the point where we could see that as well as the big picture?
I hope so. I mean, there's always a dichotomy. In Chinese medicine, we call it yin and yang, but and you need to see both. You need to see the big picture. You need to see the little picture, and find that balance between the two of them. But I'm concerned in some hand how it's just so much reductionism is more the the going situation in so many things, medicine, economics, and human potential, and just how we live our lives.
It's kind of the foundation, is it not, that we've built the status quo on?
Yeah. So then it begs the question: is this just deep embedded in human psychology? And I think that goes again to like conscious evolution. I think in human psychology, or our brain physiology at the lowest levels of the brain's anatomy is the brainstem, the reptilian brain, where it's just they're all about survival, and you do anything you can to survive. And then as we achieved higher brain function, we got to the limbic brain and the limbic system and emotions. And then the highest potential of the brain is the neocortex, that ability to see cognitively, and then at higher functions of the neocortex, see holistically and see really, really insightful type of thinking.
So basically, our brains are evolving. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean that's evolution has shown from earliest humans and even before humans the brain structure and what they were capable of thinking and doing to the evolution, including language, the use of tools, and to the 20th and 21st century, and everything that's been created technologically. It's sometimes it's mind-blowing, and you wonder sometimes, has technology gone so fast so far that we're still like running to catch up to it? A lot
Well,
of yeah, sorry.
I can certainly see that. I mean, I feel like I'm running to catch up with it all the time.
Yeah, there's a number of wisdom cultures that have talked about that, technology needs a heart, needs to take into account who are we, how does this affect society, and and does our wisdom need to catch up with our technology? And you wonder if that, they're not wrong in that regard.
You do wonder, don't you? You know,
Yeah, you know,
as we use different parts of our brain, don't they then develop just like a muscle?
yeah, that's a truism that just like the body develop it a muscle and the brain, the more we exercise it and use it, the more it develops and the more, the bigger we can think. Um,
If that's the case, then are we just in the process of exercising the part of our brain that can conceive of the whole picture?
yeah, that's the hope. I mean, Zen calls it big mind. It's, that ability to see in a big way. There was a philosopher, Jean Gebser, a Swiss philosopher, who called it a-perspectival thinking, that ability to see almost 360-degree thinking at large perspectives. Um, so there are different terms for this kind of way of that ability to see the big picture, basically, to understand how do my actions affect others and the interconnectedness of it all. Um, you mentioned the film I'm making, or I'm just about done, How to Save Democracy. One of the people I wanted to interview in the film, and I did, was a woman who's in an American indigenous descent. She's a member of the Iroquois Confederacy, or Haudenosaunee Confederacy, as the indigenous people call it. She's also a lawyer and historian and a professor of indigenous law at Syracuse University. And why I wanted to interview her was that the Haudenosaunee Constitution was the basis for the U.S. Constitution.
Well,
And
we're
there,
going to have to leave a cliffhanger and pick up on the
oh,
other side of
okay,
the station,
sure,
Craig.
sure.
Michael and I will return very shortly, so don't go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org.
One people, one nation, searching through the night. One people, one nation, searching for the light. One people, one nation, coming from the stars. One people, one nation, to heal this earth of ours. Our gracious Mother Earth, our Father in the sky. The end has come, the night has fallen. I have reached the end of days. What's real is not, reason fails me. I've gone beyond all known pathways. This is the
Is a revolution needed? With us this hour discussing quantum revolution and the current state of affairs is Michael Wayne, the author of Towards a More Perfect Union, From Scarcity to Abundance for All. Before we get into a revolution, Michael, I'd like to finish the last thought that we were on. And you were talking about where the Constitution came from, what was used to build it. Would you continue?
Oh, sure. Thank you, Gwilda. Yeah, so the U.S. Constitution, as this person I interviewed in my film, my current upcoming film, How to Save Democracy, talked about, the U.S. Constitution was based on the Iroquois, or Haudenosaunee people's constitution. And and the reason I'm bringing it up is because their constitution, as this interview subject talked about, was based on all people are taken care of, all that that all people are part of one clan, even if they're not blood related, and that all actions are thought of, how do these actions affect up to 7 generations down the road. And so it's interesting, the U.S. Constitution missed, even though they borrowed a lot of the ideas from the Iroquois Constitution, they missed that. And it's unfortunately, they missed a very important part of it. But they were the Iroquois understood how interconnected we all are.
It's huge, isn't it? It's like my my teacher told me. He was a medicine man, and he would go live with the family. If there was one sick member, he felt the whole family was sick. And if there was one sick member in society, he felt the whole society was sick. So it goes right along this same thing. And yet we're looking for an outside cause and not looking within, aren't we?
Right. Yeah. That's an important point. It was a big discovery in Western medicine, the germ theory, because that did help explain a lot of diseases caused by germs and led to antibiotics and, wiping out certain diseases. But then everything got seen as outside causes. It's all germs. And then, of course, the overuse of antibiotics created more problems. So there's how do you find that balance? And that's the idea of like integrative medicine. How do you use the best of both parts of the world of medicine? And of course, as you're talking about your teacher living, as a shaman healer, being with the family, you get to know the stresses the family's under, their diet, their lifestyle, all the things that in the old-fashioned family doctor of Western medicine, that kind of thing was also a situation.
Yes, there was a continuum, wasn't there?
Yeah, yeah. In American society, we call that the old-fashioned, or maybe not old-fashioned, but the country doctor who was part of the community. And we've lost so much of that. Also that back then doctors made house calls.
Yeah,
It
I
wasn't that
actually
big.
remember that, believe it or not.
Yeah, yeah. So it wasn't that big a thing, and that's gone by the wayside too.
So, Michael, what is a quantum revolution? You speak of that. What is it?
Well, that phrase came out of my book, Quantum Integral Medicine, toward a new science of healing and human potential. And really it was, I took a lot of big ideas to put in that book, but it was about how do we, but kind of using the term quantum consciousness. I mentioned big mind. In a way it was that, the quantum physics is a very big area of study, and a lot of ideas come from it, and a lot of has a lot of practical ramifications. We wouldn't have computers if not for the discoveries in quantum mechanics, but it also tells us that we have, again, we have the ability to see and think and act and behave in such a big-hearted, big-minded way. And so if more and more people start acting that way, or are imbuing that quantum consciousness, quantum mind, that's when it'll become a quantum revolution. And, theories on tipping points say that only, something like 3% of a population, some think 1% of a population, some think even less than 1% of a population, when it goes in that direction, that tipping point happens.
So, what are those you were mentioning, that of mind and consciousness, the quantum level of those? What is that?
Well, you could break it down in different domains. I mean, people who are more spiritually oriented may think people will have more spiritual capabilities, whether it's psychic capabilities or telekinetic capabilities.
Now, this is after the tipping point. Is this what you're saying?
Oh, after the tipping point.
Okay.
So for me, as someone who's very grounded in written books and making a film on current events and practical things, I think it's like living in a society where kindness not to sound passe, but kindness rules. And we think about, just like I talked about the Iroquois Constitution and the basis of it, that what actions, actions that we think about actions that impact 7 generations. So if we base our ideas and our motives and who we are based on how does this impact things down the road, generations down the road, we will make decisions that are for the greater good. And so, ultimately, it is about the greater good. It's expanding our frame of reference from just, oh, it's all about me, to it's all about everyone. Yes, we have to think about ourselves, but we want to think about other people too, and how it affects the community, how it affects our family, our community, our collective, our world. So just you keep expanding your sphere of influence until it's the biggest sphere of influence possible. And that's when you're starting to touch on, that's when more people are doing that, we reach that quantum revolution, and we again create that society that is more fair, that works for all. And we've seen this throughout history where societies reach a level that creates more fairness for more people.
Well, looking around us, we have the poverty, the homeless, human suffering. Looks like we're not there yet. And
Yeah,
how
yeah.
did we end up here, and how do we move from here to there?
Yeah, that's the thing. There's a saying, history repeats itself, and others say, oh, history, I forgot the saying, history isn't just repeat itself, it rhymes. So yeah, the U.S. has problems, poverty and homelessness, and yet there are other democracies in the world that don't have these problems as much. One of the people I interviewed in my film is someone, a writer, journalist who lives in Finland, who is Finnish, and we talked about what's going on in Finland. She said there is no homeless problem, poverty is very little, because again, um, it's imbued into the zeitgeist of the people. We take care of everyone. We have a strong social safety net. So I think in this country we've gone astray because more selfishness has taken over, more greed, and greed is unfortunately one of the baser human instincts, and sometimes it needs to be reined in. And that's, I think, in this country, the history that has gone, the pendulum that has swung back and forth, where greed takes over, like in the Gilded Age, and then it gets a chain put, it gets limitations, restraints put on it by laws, by being shamed. Then the greed comes back, and then it gets stopped again. So you hope we as humans, and especially in America, learn the lesson, and get it right one more time and not go back again to.
So, Finland is, their population as compared to, say, the U.S.?
Yeah, it's definitely a much smaller country, more homogenous. But I think, yeah, so that'll be, some people will say, well, they can do it there because it's small. But I think it can be scaled up to a higher level. I think part of it is a mindset, because the Finnish woman I interviewed, she's actually has dual citizenship in the U.S. and Finland. So she said she lived in New York City for, I think, 10, 15 years. And she said, when I lived in New York, she was a writer, like middle class, lower middle class. She said, I paid the same tax rate in New York as Finland, but I had much less. But when you add it all together, I paid much more in living in New York because I had to pay for childcare and health insurance. So I think it's a mindset that we can take some of those things that the social democracies of the world, Finland, the Nordic countries, Western Europe, and other countries, um, you know, to some degree have. And if we want to adopt it here, we could find a way. We have to scale it up. Maybe it won't be a perfect model, but it probably would be a better model than the way we're going right now.
It sounds like a pretty drastic change would be involved.
Yeah, it would have to be some sort of gradual transition. It never works to just like break things apart and start something anew. You have to change. You have to, people, and anytime there's change, oftentimes people go kicking and screaming into the change, and then there'll be, you know, forces against it, countervailing forces. So it's, but when people see that things are good and momentum is going towards something that's good, the greater good, they get on board. Um, one of the greatest U.S. presidents, in my estimation, was Franklin Roosevelt. And after he had been in office for a few years, when he ran for re-election, things were still a problem in the 1930s with the Great Depression, but he won re-election, I believe, by the greatest margin ever of any U.S. president. He got 523 electoral votes, and his opponent got 8 electoral votes, and it was mainly because people were, even though they still were struggling, but they were happy to see, a government that worked and was working for the people.
Well, now
So,
it's time to go into yet another station break.
yeah, sure.
Michael and I will be right back to continue our discussion, so stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org.
One people, one nation, coming from the stars. One people, one nation, to heal this earth of ours. Our gracious Mother Earth, our Father in the sky, have joined again in love to may you walk in beauty. 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 Beauty above, beauty below.
Why do great ideas lose something in the application? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us taking a closer look at the evolution of socialism is Michael Wayne. His website, drmichaelwayne.com. Michael, what changes do we need to see in our personal and national value systems in order to bring more equity, economic equity into our world?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things. I think, as a health practitioner, I see, I work with people one-on-one, and I try to help them become healthier. So I think the healthier people live their lives can really create a society. One way can create a society that works for all. There's a lot of factors that lead to illness, and diet and lifestyle is a big part of it. But then there's a lot of factors that work against people becoming healthier, from their own personal choices to the pressures that are put on them by the advertising agency and big agriculture and so on, the profit motive. So I think, and that's another change over the last 20, 30 years. We've seen more information about public health, about ways for people to become healthier, which is great. And yet we've seen the disease rates in the U.S. go up. So it's a very weird dichotomy that goes on as some things, it's like the seesaw where the good keeps rising, but then the other side, the not so good, also rises. And so that's part of my mission in life, is to help the good keep rising. And
It would be lovely to see that, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I think people overall are good and really like being connected to other people. And so it's unfortunate, this disunion that's going on, because ultimately we're not that much different from one another.
And there are being separate from everything around us. What kind of problems does that create?
Yeah, that's a good point, Quilda. A lot of the issues we see is just that separation that happens. And is it part of the human instinct too, that kind of in spirituality and philosophy talk about dualism. We separate from ourselves, and therefore we learn separation from one another. um, but but the more we understand, we're a diverse people, but we have so much, again, so much in common. We may worship to the same God, to a different God. We may eat differently, dress differently, style our hair differently, color our hair differently, all kinds of things, that make us individuals and individuate ourselves. But ultimately, we all want to be heard, respected, find kindness, compassion, love. And, those things are really the most important things in life.
So, what reconfiguration needs to happen in the economic system for us all to have equal chance, for us all to be fed, basically?
Yeah, so that's a really important question, and I think it goes back to these values I was just talking about. If we think about, and I brought up the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois people, and their constitution. If we think that all people need to be fed, all people need to be taken care of, so I guess it comes down to two things. One is, how do we legislate these ideals, and then how do we make it part of our human psychology to realize and recognize that everybody needs that these are like basic innate human values towards doing the right thing. And that's where, like, again, that when we talked about earlier about like, the basic human instinct of greed taking over, or it kind of like rears its head, then is clamped back down again. We need to find, how do we, keep a lid on the greed where it doesn't get carried away. And we realize that everybody needs a chance in life, right from the start.
How much do you think? How much do you think that our education system is based on competition, right? Who gets the highest score, who plays, best football, et cetera, et cetera. So in other words, you have to compete to succeed in our education system. So kids are brought up on this. How much do you think that eventually plays into greed and the I'm going to get mine at the cost of somebody else mentality?
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's another good question. I think, competition is, there's a play, again, like the yin and yang. There's competition and there's cooperation, and we need both. I mean, competition spurs people to want to be the best they could be, but then there's also cooperation, that we work together. If we go back to the ideas of Charles Darwin, who is considered, you wouldn't call him the discoverer of evolution, but he was the one who really postulated it for the first time in writing a book about evolution, and created a science and laws of it. But he mistakenly gets it mistakenly gets attributed to him the phrase "survival of the fittest," which he never said, and people who are called social Darwinists have said. So in the ideas of social Darwinism, it's a dog eat dog world, and the one who amasses all the toys wins. But Darwin put forth what he called the sympathy hypothesis, that humans evolve and have a better chance of evolving when they work together and collaborate, because then they can share the resources they have and everybody gets ahead. And that's the traits that he found allowed for the survival and evolution of the species. So, again, there's a place for competition, and, important place for cooperation. And, I would say, you brought up the education system. Some schools do a better job of stressing cooperation, and other schools stress competition. It's like, especially getting into college, and, a lot of kids have a lot of anxiety that they got to get into the best college. Um, but then it gets into the whole question of what is happiness? Is happiness getting to the best college that's going to potentially achieve the highest salary, or is it living a fulfilling life? So these are basic life questions, and so I think without learning cooperation, competition is empty, and if it's just we need both.
Does this come from the tendency to polarize one direction or the other in all things that are opposite versus seeking balance?
So you mean competition or just
Well,
or
you have competition, cooperation, you have greed, you have generosity. All of these are two sides of the same coin, but it seems like there's a lot of polarization going on, which creates an imbalance. If
yeah.
that's yeah, how do we come out of that till we find the balance?
Yeah, that's another good point. I think that's you know, again, like the teachings of Chinese medicine, Chinese philosophy of yin and yang, the harmony of opposites, that there's going to be these different poles, but how do we bring them into balance? The competition, the collaboration, cooperation, the some people are going to be far ahead of others, but so I think again when we add compassion there and we think about like the famous saying, I think it was John F. Kennedy said, a rising tide lifts all boats, that even if one person has competed, done really well, but how do they make sure others who didn't have perhaps all the opportunities that one person had can also achieve whatever it is they can achieve to the best of their ability? And I think that's part of creating a society that works for all, economically, and just fairness. I mean, sports is all a competition. So yeah, you want to see a winner or want to see a loser, but not all of life is sports, you know, and most of life we want to help each other work together.
We speak of you speak of helping the people that are don't have the opportunities of the other person, but let's go into a polar opposite of that, or into the pole of that, and we have people that don't want to do anything and expect to be taken care of, and there's whole generations of people getting stuck on welfare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because of the victim stance as well. Doesn't that have to be addressed to find balance?
Yeah, I think yeah, that's a good point. I think we have to look at root causes also as to why are there problems. You know, victimization is another deeply rooted um, psychological trait deep in the survival brain, because some people in that survival instinct will attack and other people will run away and be afraid and be a victim. But I think there's a lot of root causes why so many people are in that place of needing assistance, and I think some of it are very deep systemic issues, and some of it, like you brought up the education system. There's a lot of inequities in our education system. I believe the United States is the only country in the world where our property taxes pay the bulk of the school budget, and so that makes it hard. Um, I brought up the woman I interviewed in Finland. Finland has the number one rated education system in the world, and we talked about that when I interviewed her. And one, they don't use property taxes as the main way of funding schools, and also she said they make the schooling education system very egalitarian. There's no private schools. There's no program for those who are accelerated. So they want to make sure everybody has an equal opportunity. For better or worse, we can argue is that the best way, but on the other hand, the metric is that Finland has, the highest rated education system in the world.
Well, it's time for yet another station break. Please stay with us as Michael and I continue to explore abundance for all. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org.
One people, one nation, searching through the night. One people, one nation, searching for the light. One people, one nation, coming from the stars. his dream. A whisper of touch, an unheard song, whose bird takes flight, prompted by his broken heart. Fly high, sweet phoenix, even though you are free. Soar above my broken life, bring your healing tears to me.
Are you telling me I have to change? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Michael Wayne. His website, drmichaelwayne.com. Michael, apparently we need some change. What do you see? Where do you see it needs starting? Where does it need to start?
Oh, that's a big question, Gwilda. And you started this segment saying, "Are you telling me we have to change? We have to change?" So, yeah, change starts from both the individual and the collective. Um, Gandhi famously said, "Be the change you want to see in the world." So if you want to see a more peaceful world, but you're carrying lots of anger, that's that's a contradiction. Um, so the more we can, and Gandhi also said, democracy requires a change of heart. So there's a lot of you know you know big-heartedness that's needed as in order for us to change to become kinder, gentler people.
It seems like the heart's been shut down a lot, though, in society. What's caused that?
I think life has gotten for so many people, unfortunately, more and more challenging, harder. A lot of people struggling to make ends meet, and just unfortunately too, they've become more. It pushes people to become more cynical and forget, forget the basic goodness. Forget that, we're all in the same boat, trying to get ahead and be good to each other. So, the media, there's a lot of cynicism in the media and politicians, and people don't trust, a lot of politicians. And so it just seems to be like an age of angst, anxiety, and just cynicism. And it's, how do we find our way back to, again, something more positive, a more positive. There's many times when people share experiences, whether sporting events or music concerts, and we call that term unitive consciousness. And how do we find our way to those more experiences of unitive consciousness where people get ecstatic and excited and happy about something together?
Well, we used to have that built in, didn't we? People would dance around the fire or celebrate a birth, or, the whole tribe would do it. And now we're so large. Do you think the size of society is playing into this?
Um, that's a good question. I personally don't think it's the size of society as much as just, the things that are more tearing it apart. Just like we talked earlier, how the human body by Western medicine has been, torn, I don't know, torn, but broken down into various parts. And I brought up the concept of reductionism, which is, understanding that things get broken down into smaller and smaller parts, in medicine especially, then you could find the one pill, the one solution. So it seems like we're just, things get broken down into more and more parts, and you lose the big picture, and we lose that sense of how connected we are to one another.
It seems like that you hear money's the root of all evil, but isn't there a uncanny focus on money in our society? And what do you think are the results of that?
Yeah, money's been around a long time, and supposedly, the saying that money is the root of all evil. And then it was, some people said, oh, is the real phrase is the love of money is the root of all evil. So I don't know which one is the full truism, but there's an interesting historical aspect to money. Paper money was invented around the year 1000 by the Chinese, and it led them to become a very prosperous and technologically advanced society. And then I think it was 300 years later, the emperor, 300 or 400 years later, maybe 300, the emperor saw that the Chinese people were so enamored with money and focused on money that they were losing their human values. And he removed paper money from circulation, and that was the end of money in China for a few hundred years. And paper money didn't come back on the scene till in Europe another 100, 200 years later. So yeah, it's that chasing of the shiny objects, the bling that can really get people, losing track of who they are.
And what's important.
Yeah. In fact, last night I was watching an interview with Elton John, and he was talking about how from 19 like when he first became famous, and for quite a long time he realized his whole life was being famous, and he said his values got warped. He started abusing drugs, and he became very excessive. And he said it wasn't until he you know got away from that he realized he's a human first and not just some famous celebrity.
Keeping that perspective is so important. So
Yeah.
it's the time in the show when I get to ask you, Michael, what's your mission?
What's my mission? Well, as I said earlier, I said it's helping people. I've been helping people one-on-one for my whole working professional life, and as my mission has evolved, like as we all hope we evolve, it's my desire to help people has expanded into helping the widest number of people, which has led me to write books and make films. So it's really helping people evolve into what we call this and creating a quantum revolution.
And so what is a quantum revolution? Let's ask that one again.
Yeah, so that's where we start seeing, acting, behaving, even loving from our highest good. And so we always think about how does our actions affect as many people as possible. So it's not just what's in it for me, but what's in it for everyone, or what's in it for my tribe, my people, my community, my geographic community, or my country, my world.
So why quantum? Why how's quantum?
Well, quantum, yeah. So depending on how much time we have here, quantum physics, quantum mechanics is the idea that matter starts from a wave and comes from, and the beginnings of life come from a quantum soup, a primordial soup, and then the matter is both a wave and a function, and there's infinite possibilities. And this is how our brain thinks in infinite possibilities. But it's only when we reduce the world to one world that we get stuck in one way. But if we see the world that has infinite possibilities, we're not just stuck in one way or one dogma. We can see how other people think, and we can see all sides of a solution, and it starts opening us up to understanding other people and what they think about something. And that's where, like I talked about in Chinese philosophy, the harmony of opposites, we start seeing how can opposite ideas come together in harmony to find a solution to a third way.
So pulling out of that polarization we were talking about earlier.
Right. Yeah. Away from polarization, away from dualism to something more, unifying.
Balanced.
Yeah.
So Michael, what's your vision for the future?
Well, some might call me a starry-eyed optimist or a wild dreamer, but I think, humans are innately good, people are innately good, and if we are helped guided towards the greater good, the common good, we, not only can achieve our personal best, but we can create what's best for society. And what I believe the best for society is a society that works for all, that's fair for as many people, or at least people have the opportunity to flourish And I think human flourishing is actually the ideas of human flourishing date back from the Greek philosophers Aristotle and Plato, and continued in the European Enlightenment, and those ideas were what inspired the writers of the American Constitution, besides the Iroquois Constitution. And so human flourishing was really important ideas for the framers of the American Constitution and Declaration of Independence. And that's why Jefferson wrote, all men are created equal, and we have inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
It's interesting how far we've gotten from that, isn't it?
Yeah, but we can be, but there's a center, there's a North Star that we can go towards and that can keep guiding us towards.
And that North Star would be?
Well, again, human flourishing, that we all can be we all are a clan. We're all one big family, or we're all connected. And if what I do impacts someone in a not a great way, then I will think, is that the best actions for me to take? So in business, we call it positive sum or win-win.
And you believe in a win-win, yes?
Yeah, I think, also business talks about, instead of shareholders, stakeholders. When all stakeholders are taken into account, things go better.
Well, unfortunately, Michael, we're out of time. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you, Gwilda. It's been a pleasure.
Our guest this hour has been Michael Wayne. Michael is the author of 5 books, his latest, Towards a More Perfect Union, From Scarcity to Abundance for All. To find out more about Michael, where you can find his books and all he has to offer, visit his website, drmichaelwayne.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. But please, be sure to join me right here next time as this mission continues, bringing information, resources, and support to a rapidly evolving world.